Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about what Game Freak, the developer for the mainline Pokemon games, got right and wrong with Pokemon Legends ZA. So I've now put in a few dozen hours into the game. I haven't fully beaten the game and seen everything the game has to offer, but I feel like at this point I have a pretty good understanding of what this game has to offer. And I've noticed things that Game Freak has gone right with Pokemon Legends ZA, but I've also noticed some things that Game Freak has gone wrong with Pokemon Legends ZA. And I thought this would be a good conversation to have right now, because right now there is a great deal of conversation happening online about this game. A lot of criticisms, a lot of critiques, a lot of negativity, a lot of arguments, but then also a lot of praise as well. And so I feel like a lot of people might see all of these conversations, the praise, the negativity, and be confused as to what is actually going on. So I figured I would go in and try to give a fair perspective on the things that Game Freak got right and wrong with this game. Now, before going forward, let me point out that I have this goal to reach 60,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you do find yourself enjoying this video or some of my other videos, I would very much appreciate your support in whatever form that may come in. Liking the video, comments, sharing the video, using that new hype feature on YouTube, all that makes a huge difference. So I would very much appreciate it, and also I would like to thank you for sticking around. But let's dive into things here by first talking about something that Game Freak got right with Pokemon Legends ZA, by going back to something Game Freak got wrong with a prior Pokemon game a few years ago. And that was the trees in a Pokemon Sword and Shield. Many people back then had a great deal of conversation, a lot of positivity, and a lot of negativity, perhaps more negativity, at least online, about this game. And a common source of conflict and debate, or just straight up criticism, were the trees in Pokemon Sword and Shield. It felt like there is a dramatic mismatch with the quality of the trees and the rest of the environment. So how about now with Legends ZA? Well, I'm pleased to say that Game Freak got this right. The trees match the environment. The trees look pretty good. You can see bark with detail, and it doesn't look flat. It has density. The leaves, there are different kinds of leaves with different kinds of trees. They all look surprisingly good. And it's great to look at trees because guess what? You might run into some different kinds of Pokemon, not just Kakuna, but even some different types of monkey Pokemon hanging around. They got the trees right, and so credit is due where credit is due. Now, perhaps what is the new version of trees this time around are the windows in Legends ZA. This is something that Game Freak, I would say, they got wrong. Throughout the year, as we've been seeing trailers on this game, it's something that I myself have been concerned about with this game, because they look like flat buildings. There's a lot of just flat buildings with just these textures of windows, and it can be a little jarring, it can be a little immersion breaking. Now, I do imagine that this choice is made by design because they were probably trying to find ways to make sure this game would run well on Switch 1. I've been playing the Switch 2 edition, and the Switch 2 edition runs at 60 frames per second, at a higher resolution, with better textures, better draw distance, and it looks and runs great. But from everything I understand of both versions, there really have been minimal glitches and performance issues. The games have been running really well. And so while going with a very simplistic look for a lot of the windows in the game seems like a weird choice, at the very least, this game, from a performance perspective, from a polish perspective, is completely fine, unlike the prior major release, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Now, do I think that Game Freak should have been able to find a way to get the games running well and still have okay looking windows? Yes, I agree with that. But I also think it should be noted that while these flat windows can be a little distracting, ultimately I find myself not really thinking about it that much throughout most of my gameplay. And sometimes I've noticed a nice little bit of reflectiveness, especially when the sun is shining in the direction of the windows. So that helps to add a little bit to the realism, and it can look kinda good. And there are also a lot of unique buildings throughout Lumio City that don't suffer from this flatness issue. Like when it comes to the buildings that pertain to some sort of event or have a more interesting interior, these buildings are fully rendered with non-flat window and windowsill textures. But going beyond aesthetics here, let's talk about the battles. The battles in Pokemon Legends ZA, I would say, are one of the highest points of the game. They did something I think is an improvement over Legends Arceus. You see, with Legends Arceus, they did also try for a new battle system, and something I really liked about that battle system is that you can move around. There was a little bit more of a realism there, which I really liked. Now, the Pokemon themselves stayed the same, and the whole strong style, agile style system, personally, I didn't really feel like was a good long-term solution. But now with Legends ZA, it seems that they've built on what they figured out with the battle system in Arceus, and they've allowed for full movement in the environment, not just yourself, but also your Pokemon following you around, giving you more opportunity to do dodges, consider area of effect attacks, and so on. So it's really added a whole new, refreshing, and fast-paced dynamic to the battles. The battles are now in real time, and the way your moves work are like arts from Xenoblade, which I've been saying they should do for years. And so it's led to some really fast-paced battles that have also managed to maintain more of the mechanics from the battle system of the traditional mainline Pokemon games outside of the Legends series. Now, there are still some things that are very much like Legends Arceus, like the way certain status moves work and so it's not exactly a replacement for the battle system we've had for years, but it's certainly something that I enjoy very much, and I can see them expanding upon this, and I wouldn't be surprised if somehow, some way, this leads to them experimenting a little bit more with the combat and the other mainline Pokemon games, and perhaps they can introduce some of this real-time element to it. Now, I do think there's room for improvement with the battle system, though. While it's really awesome to be able to move around and use all these fast-paced attacks, stringing them together, there's also a big part to the strategy of the game that seems to have been weakened dramatically, and that's the use of status moves, and more defensive-minded Pokemon to take advantage of these moves. So that's something that Game Freak needs to work on for the future, I would say. But overall, these battles fit really well to the direction they've chosen for the game. The ZA Royale I actually find to be a really cool segment to the game, where you're actually kind of challenged to get as many battles in as possible in a short span of time during the night, because the night does run out, and it found to be quite replayable, me wanting to go in for higher scores here, because every time you beat a trainer, you get a certain amount of points that can lead to a certain amount of money, and if you beat enough trainers and do enough challenges, you can actually get an increased multiplier to get even more money, which in turn you can use to buy more clothes, items, all that kind of stuff. So there's a fun arcadey replayability to the ZA Royale that I really appreciated, and I think it strongly contributes to an overall good gameplay loop. However, something that I think was handled perhaps a little bit incorrectly is the whole Z to A thing, because you don't actually go from Z to A rank here. There's a point where you skip like 15 different ranks, and that's kind of surprising. I think they probably should have thought of a different way to pace the game. I understand why they did it, but I think they should have made decisions as to how the game would have been paced, so that would not have been necessary. But at this point in the game, once you skip to the higher ranks, things open up even more. There's more to do in the world, and a lot of that has to do with the rogue Mega Evolutions. You can now start using your own Mega Evolutions. You're expanding upon your roster and your different Mega Evolutions that are useful against these rogue Mega Evolutions that are effectively boss fights. And this is something where I think Game Freak really got it right here. These Pokemon Mega Evolve into giant-sized versions of these Mega Evolutions and have epic attacks that are widespread and feel like boss fights even with multiple players involved. And these boss Pokemon target you hard. I've actually died, and that's something I can't really say for most Pokemon games. There is an increased challenge here, not an unfair challenge, I'll say, an appropriate level of challenge where at times you will find yourself definitely at risk. It's exhilarating, it's fun, and this time around you're actually able to use the main combat system to fight the boss the entire time. Game Freak made significant strides in this department, so actually having a lot of really cool boss fights throughout the game, a huge W here. What isn't a huge W though, and I think could really hamper some people even getting to this point in the game, is the slow start. The game does start off slow, and I gotta be honest, like, I played this game and I was a little bit turned off at first. Like, the opening moments I felt were cool, like cinematically, visually. I was like, oh, okay, this is certainly an improvement from prior Pokemon games in a lot of ways, especially because I've been playing on the Switch too, and I'm noticing the 60 FPS. But once I get out of the train station, I get into the building, and I'm greeted by Tawny, I'm just dealing with so much dialogue. Not necessarily in that one moment, but after that moment, there's some stuff that goes on, then there's more dialogue, and then there's more dialogue, and then I'm strung along, and I'm limited in what I can do with my missions. Like, there's a lot of hand-holding for the first hour or two of the game, which personally kind of annoyed me. I didn't want to read all the tutorial text. I didn't want to only do certain small, simple tasks early on to the game. I wanted to explore the whole city. Now, eventually, things do open up, but those first couple hours are kind of slow. And I think this is an issue regardless of what Pokemon game we're talking about here, but I think this is more so an issue with the Legends games. I understand that with the other mainline games that are following the more traditional format, you're appealing to a very large audience, a lot of people who only play Pokemon, a lot of people who are used to how Pokemon has always been and are okay with that, a lot of people who are young children who aren't that experienced at games. And so I understand wanting to have tutorials here and doing things in a certain way, that way a big part of their audience can enjoy the games appropriately. I still think there are better ways to do it, but it's more egregious when it's for the Legends games that are more core-centric, that have more difficulty, that are clearly catered to a more core audience. When you have these hand-holdy, multi-hour tutorials, it's kind of annoying. I think there is a way to teach people effectively without limiting those people who do not really want to be taught and just want to figure it out on their own. So that's something I think Game Freak needs to work on for future games. But I am so glad I got past the slow start, not just because of the battles, the ZA Royale, the awesome boss fights, but also finally being able to actually explore Lumiose City and see what it has to offer. I've come to really enjoy this city. And the reason for that is that it actually has a great deal of personality with the characters, with the Pokemon. There are so many side quests. As you continue to progress in the game, more and more side quests open up. And the side quests might just be, I don't even think it's a might, I think it's an absolute definite objective truth. The side quests in Pokemon Legends ZA are by far the greatest side quests we've ever seen in a Pokemon game. A lot of people are probably jumping on the whole hate bandwagon on Legends ZA, saying that it's an empty, barren world, because that's kind of like a common criticism to just put on a game just to say it's bad, without actually knowing the truth of the matter. The fact of the matter is, Legends ZA is anything but. There is so much to do in the world of Lumiose City, including all of these side quests. And these side quests are very interesting. They feel like little mini Pokemon anime episodes. Like, I ran into a Chespin early on who wanted to fight a taxi, which was kind of funny. He was trying to prove himself, prove his mettle, and he had a certain spunk to him. And so you speak to this person who's like, hey, can we do anything about this? And so you start fighting the Chespin to help him vent his frustrations, his aggression. And so you beat him. And he's like, oh no, I want to fight you again. And so you beat him again. And he's like, oh no, I still want to fight you again. So it happens several times. And then it's like, hey, maybe a better solution would be to just have Chespin join you. And so you can train him up appropriately to become strong as a proper trainer. And that feels like an anime episode. There are a whole bunch of things like that happening with Pokemon, different characters, odd happenings all throughout the environment. These side quests are interesting. I can play for hours just exploring Lumiose City, doing different side quests. So I would say this is one of the biggest, best W's we've seen Game Freak do in a very long time, and I don't see enough conversation happening about this online. So hopefully me making this point now will contribute to there being more of a conversation on the side quests being a huge win, because if we don't celebrate this, maybe they won't do it again. This is making the game a lot better. So if side quests are like this moving forward for all Pokemon games, we're talking about a much, much better experience here. Now, there is room for improvement for the side quests, but I think this is probably asking too much of Game Freak. and that would be voice acting. Because a lot of these moments are very interesting, but there's no voice acting. Now, for the side quests, I don't think it's a big deal that there isn't voice acting, but it brings you to the bigger point of just voice acting overall. Because there are a lot of cutscenes for the main story where we do see the characters and they're actually well animated. I feel that Game Freak's actually been making strides in this direction, which I think is worthy of praise. However, to some extent, it's almost felt counterproductive because as they've made strides in this direction, it's made the lack of voice acting more jarring because we see these characters moving their lips naturally, doing all these, being very expressive throughout these different moments. And with no voice acting, it kind of just seems weird at times. Sometimes it still works, but other times it doesn't. And maybe they could get away with just having like more gibberish or more sound effects. And they do have some, but not many. Like I've noticed that if it's a Pokemon, they will do like the Pokemon growl or whatever in that cutscene, so the Pokemon kind of fits. But like maybe the characters might do some sort of gesture and you won't even hear a sound with that. It's not even just like the talking. They're not really putting in the effort in terms of overall audio effects here. So there's certainly a lot of room for improvement there. Now, on the note of audio effects, I will say the music in this game is great, as it has been for other games. Now, I actually feel that the music in Legends Arceus was especially good, and it seems that with Legends EA, they are following a similar level of quality here. It's not the same style of music, but it does all sound pretty good. Now for this last one here, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, I think it's good, and then on another, I think there's certainly room for improvement here. And that's just the city itself, the world we explore. As I said earlier, there are actually varying points of interest that are rendered in a lot more detail, and you go inside these different buildings, and there's a lot more to the interiors. I said this before in my graphics comparison from a few days ago. This game does have some of the best looking, if not straight up just the best looking interiors we've ever seen for a Pokemon game. So inside buildings, Game Freak got it right this time around. And there are more buildings to enter and do different stuff in ZA compared to other recent Pokemon offerings, which I feel like they've been shying away from as they've been focusing a little bit more on exploring these more wider worlds, which is cool, but I feel like they should be able to do both. And so there's a little bit of that, but also there's many other buildings that you can never enter. It's just like a flat texture, and so it is a bit of a mixed bag from that perspective. And many people have had concerns that perhaps exploring Lumio City, there wouldn't be that much variety to the environment because it is just one city, and a lot of the buildings do look very samey. This is the case, even though there are actually some interesting buildings you can find that are different. There's still a lot that feels very samey, and you don't get to explore as much of a variety to the environments as you would in other Pokemon games. But there is some variety to the game. There are even sewers and some hills, and as you progress in the game, they add more and more wild areas, so the map continually changes. So it's not all dull, and I'll also say that it actually is fun to interact with the world. It goes beyond just a side quest, by the way, because of course you're going to run into Pokemon not just in the wild areas, but you'll just sometimes find them roaming the streets, sometimes in trees or on the rooftops, and you'll be able to run into a lot of alpha Pokemon and things like that, so there's certainly plenty of places to catch different types of Pokemon and interact with them. But also, you'll run into different things that Pokemon have left behind, like sludge, ice, boulders, thickets, and you can break these down. And what's interesting about this is that these things cause blockades of some kind, and you actually can use moves like HMs of the past to break these things down and progress. But what's neat this time around is that it's not based on one specific move, but a type of move. So if you see sludge, you won't be able to break it with a physical attack, but you will be able to wash it out with water or burn it away with fire. Or if you see a big boulder, a Pokemon with a strong physical fighting attack will be able to break it down. It's not just Rock Smash. And then also, as you progress into the game, you obtain a little bit more ability when it comes to your platforming, which gives you more freedom in going from one building to another on the rooftops, which makes exploration a bit more fun. On the flip side though, I also gotta say that I miss ride Pokemon. Like, I'm running around all the time. Yes, there are a lot of fast travel points, so it's not absolutely necessary, and there's so much to interact with throughout the world with all these different things you're breaking down to get resources, capture Pokemon, find side quests, all that stuff, visit different buildings, buy different stuff, find just unique events. Like, there's certainly a lot to do, but I still would have liked to have been able to ride Pokemon as I've been able to do in prior games. Now, Pokemon following you around is nice. That is something that we begged for as fans for many years, which is now a series staple. But I do have to say that sometimes when the Pokemon get too big, it can be a little distracting when they're right next to you the entire time, or maybe they move around too slow, so if you are running around, they tend to just fall behind. So I think that there's more work that needs to be done with this mechanic to the game and how Pokemon follow you around. Just balance how these Pokemon interact with you as you explore the world, being able to maintain pace where it makes sense, and also don't let them be distracting to your view of the game world if they are too big. If they are too big, maybe they should space themselves out a little bit more. So there are certainly things that Game Freak can continue to improve upon with the Pokemon games. But I don't think it's fair to say that Legends ZA is a horrendous game. By no stretch of the imagination is it actually horrendous from what I've played. It's actually a good game. I continue to want to play more and more. And I'm saying this as someone who really loved Legends Arceus and was actually somewhat disappointed once they finally started to show gameplay for Legends ZA. I was disappointed and I felt like they weren't advertising this game well. But as we got closer to release and we learned a little bit more, I was more willing to give this game a try, and now that I've played this game and gone through the slow start to the game that was hard to get through for me personally, I've come to really enjoy the overall gameplay loop, and there's so much going on here. I think there's actually something special, and I think a lot of people aren't paying enough attention to the details of this game because of some of the aesthetics that a lot of people have a problem with. But going back to the first thing we talked about that Game Freak got right with Legends ZA, I think this is actually an important point, and it's not as simple as it sounds. Because Sword and Shield, a Pokemon game that came out on Switch a few years ago, many of us had issues with the trees, but we had conversations about that, and they've improved on the trees. And so I think it is important to have conversations. I think there's a productive way to do it. I think lying and spreading misinformation, sharing hacked versions of the game that don't represent the game well, is not the right way to do it. I think simply speaking about the game objectively, talking about the things you like, talking about the things you dislike, having that dialogue in a respectful way, I think is more meaningful. And I think when doing it in that way, the developers at Game Freak will eventually hear these conversations, the respectful ones, will be more receptive to it and take notes. If this all boils down to some weird political movement where we lose sight of just talking about what's going on with the game, I think it will actually hamper the developers truly getting some proper insight as to what is going on and how they can continue to improve the series. But those are my thoughts on the matter. What do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.